Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. Thank you for that introduction, Alex. My name is Ben Deloso. And yeah, I'm a horticulturist here at the garden. I've been into cycads for several years, so we'll just get right into it. So the title of the talk is the cycad collection here at Missouri Botanical Garden. It's past, present, and future. So we'll talk a little bit about cycads. Probably most of you all know what they are since I'm talking to a room of systematists, but as well. So a little bit about Cycad 2023, which is a conference that the garden graciously let me attend. Some pre-conference habitat visits, get into the history of Mobot, the collections, some recent Cycad additions, and then want to just talk a little bit about some of my personal experiences with cycads. So what is a cycad? They are palm-like seed plants, but they are not palms. They're dioecious gymnosperms. As of today, there are 2 families and 375 species, so the second most diverse family after the coniferales, Long fossil history dating back to at least 250 million years. The plants are long-lived, with individual plants in the wild believed to be over 1,000 years old. It was previously thought that cycads were like the conifers, being primarily wind pollinated, but recent investigation has shown that they're actually entomophilous, being primarily beetle pollinated, and many of the cones are thermogenic. They will produce heat, and which will release volatiles to attract pollinators. And unfortunately, around 60% of all cycads are in a threatened category, more than any other plant group. Centers of diversity include the Americas, particularly Mexico, and northern South America, tropical Africa and South Africa, Southeast Asia, and Australia, with several species inhabiting various Pacific islands. A little bit about their morphology. They do have a true stem, although some are mostly subterranean. Especially in cycas, the young leaves have circinate vernation, where they're curled up like a fern, which is rather unusual. That's a characteristic they retain from their fern ancestry. And they have these rather interesting structures called coralloid roots, which allow them to survive in some of the extreme environments they inhabit. These coralloid roots house blue-green algae or cyanobacteria, which fix atmospheric nitrogen into a form that the plants can use. So when my marine biologist friends found out about this, we just had more reason to like cycads because they look like coral. This is just a nice photo from Cologne et al. 2011, showing the diversity of cycad strobili. They're not flowers, but they are I think they're rather beautiful. You might recognize the one on the top right. That's Encephalartos ferox, which is, we have one in the climatron. So it has that bright red color. And just wanted to show this cladogram, pointing out where palms are. They're in the ericales, so the monocots, and then cycads are all the way on the left, being the oldest extant seed plants. So back to the conference, I had the pleasure of attending the 12th International Conference on Cycad Biology. It was held in Angeles City, in the Philippines. So the garden graciously let me present a version of this talk there back in July of last year. And it was well attended. There were 61 registered participants from various countries, including Japan, Mexico, Colombia, and the US. And there we all are, quite a happy bunch. I'm on the top right, might be a little hard to see. But those are all the participants, and it was a great time. So talk a little more about the conference later, but I had the pleasure of doing some pre-conference cycad habitat visits the week before the conference. So me and several other cycad specialists took a plane from Manila. We flew down to Matnog, and we explored some of these little barrier islands south of Matnog. So this was the first one was a barrier island which had the coastal species Cycas edentata. This is a species that's quite common in the Philippines and also Indonesia, Malaysia. So there's myself with Peter Machen, Thomas Marler, and Willie Tang, and Irene Terry. So these are some of the more noted seasoned cycad experts. So it was quite a joy to travel with them and hear lots of cool stories and see cycads. So in the middle photo shows Willie Tang and Irene Terry. These two individuals are without a doubt the experts in cycad pollination biology. So while we were having fun looking at cycads, we wanted to see if we could find beetle pollinators in some of the cones. So I was able to assist them with that. There's me and Willie at the Airbnb later that night, taking apart cone tissue. It was quite fun. And then trekking on that island, we got heavily rained on, which is quite common in the tropics, but we were rewarded by seeing this magnificent specimen, probably several centuries old. And then you can see the Pacific Ocean in the back, so that was quite a sight, and definitely something I'll never forget. So a couple of the other islands we visited via Banca, which I'll show you in a second. I have a little video here. Hopefully it'll play for you. It'll show that. Okay, so we got on the Banca. We hired the guy in the Banca to take us around the islands for about 200 pesos a day, about $10. So that was quite fun. So on the right, the photo on the right, you can see it says "Welcome Barangay 2021." So that was, they wanted us to know where the cycads were, so they just pointed it out for us. On this little limestone islet, here's another little video. We found some pollinators. Hopefully this will play for you. So the male cones primarily serve as a brooding site for the pollinators. They feed on pollen tissue and they also lay larvae in there. And in doing so, when they visit another cone, the female basically tricks them with the same scent profile into visiting the cone. The beetles are thinking, oh, this is another brood site, but they're flying around with pollen, and that's how pollination happens. So it might be a little hard to see. You can see the beetles kind of hanging around in there. There you go. You can sort of see it. So that was quite exciting. Willie and Irene were at absolute excitement at that time. So. And then I got up with Willie not too long ago because he sent me the photos on the right. These are actually from those collections. That is an unidentified pollinator from those habitats in the northern Philippines. He has yet to describe it. The one on the left is Cycadophila, cycad loving. And Samara is named after Samar Island, which is the type locality for where this beetle was discovered. So Willie has described several species of beetle, so I'm sure he's getting around to writing that up right now. All in all, it was a great time. Very exciting. So we'll get back to Mobot. I had this slide for the conference goers. Most of them were Filipino, just to talk about where Mobot is. Unfortunately, the climate is not conducive to the outdoor cultivation of cycads, as most of you probably know. The history of the cycad collection at the garden actually goes back to Shaw himself. So the photo on the left is a scan from 1879. This is a list of plants that Shaw himself was writing as being cultivated in the garden. So we had actually 3 cycad species there, or 4, excuse me. So rather exciting. The 1951 annual bulletin at the time boasted the most comprehensive collection of cycads at the time here in the United States. Living plants date back to 1904. which I'll talk about a little bit later. So here again, the bulletin. It says the date on which our first cycads were received must remain unknown since our records are complete only since 1898. But we know, well, I found out that, yeah, Shaw himself was aware that there were some here in the garden. And that bulletin was actually devoted to cycads. So 1951, there's the sporophylls of Cycas revoluta, what they call the sago palm, the most commonly cultivated species in the world. And that bulletin actually had a taxonomic key at the time, which I think is rather impressive, given that we've learned so much about cycads since that time. Some of the taxonomy is outdated, but nonetheless, still rather impressive. Okay, so the conservatories pre-climatron, the photo on the left is the old palm house, and it's from 1917. This was an old Victorian-style palm house that was in the place of where the climatron is currently sitting, and it contained the garden's tropicals as well as desert arid collections. Photo on the right is from 1921. And here is an interior shot. Several palms can be seen, like some economic plants. The entrance to the palm house this is from 1912, so quite a while back. Wanted to introduce this individual, Daniel Sidney Brown. He was a interesting businessman that lived in Kirkwood, right here in Missouri, and he maintained greenhouses on his property. In 1918, his health was declining, and he bequeathed the majority of his tropical plants, including some cycads, which I'll talk about a little later, to the Botanic Garden. The palm on the right photo was actually donated by him. Here's another. Within the palm house, there was a dedicated room for cycads, which was called the Cycad house. So this is from 1906. You can obviously recognize Cycas revoluta. Looks like some Dione spinulosum in there, which is a pretty commonly cultivated species from Mexico. So I thought this was interesting. The bulletin in 1914 said the large consumption of coal in St. Louis has made the successful outdoor growing of evergreen conifers almost impossible. And then there has not been a suitable place to display the garden's large cycad collection. So, as you may know, that time the coal pollution was pretty bad here in St. Louis. They were actually considering moving the garden to where Shaw's Nature Reserve is today. So I imagine several plants, unfortunately, did not make it through those tough times. Here's another nice photo from 1914. Several cycads and conifers are seen there. And actually that lantern is in the Japanese garden today. So pretty neat that you can see it right there 100 years ago and it's still here in the garden. By the 1950s, the old palm house was in need of badly needed repairs. So the director at the time, Dr. Fred Swentz, decided that it needed to be torn down, and he hired a local architectural firm, Murphy and Mackey, to engineer what would be the latest in modern 21st century design, which eventually became the climatron. There's Murphy and Mackey on the right, overseeing the construction. Began in '59 and was opened in 1960. There's the climatron frame being up with some palms that were left over from the old palm house. Here's another photo. These are all in the archives, by the way, if anyone wants to see more photos. I didn't want to add too many to take up time, but interestingly, the records do not mention cycads during the construction of the climatron, even though many of them in there are older than the climatron themselves, so they had to have survived the freeze of '59 because several palms were killed and other tropicals. So, I'm not saying cycads are better than palms, but you might come to that conclusion. Here's another photo. You can see from the 1960s, there's Cycas revoluta, the bottom left, Diune spinulosum in the background, Monstera. In 1989, the climatron was fully renovated. All of the cycads were left in place. The large pillars, Ionian pillars, were removed. Paths were designed around them. So I included this photo because the pandanus is a Philippine species, Pandanus copelandii. So I told many of the conference goers to say, if you ever want to come to St. Louis and you're Filipino, you can see some Philippine plants right here. This is from '89 again. You can see some cycads in the background, the pandanus there, which is still there today. And then these, Diune spinulosum, now they overlook the little fish tank feature in the climatron. So this is them 35 years ago, still there. Okay, so we'll go back to the 1904 World's Fair. This was a rather significant event that was held here in St. Louis. Archival records show that many cycads were donated to the garden at this time. And plants that are alive today that could be traced to the World's Fair include two Diune edulae that were donated from the Mexican Commission. One is a male, the other is a female plant. And in digging in to the accession books, I actually found the records for the plants themselves. So there it is, the Diune edulae. I believe that's two. I can't quite see the number here, but they were bought for $52. And some Diune spinulosum, I guess $10. I'd have to look up what that is in today's dollars, but. So those two plants that are still alive, we actually did what we are almost certain is the first hand pollination of these cycads. So I did some hand pollination work in Guam, so I kind of knew how to the timing and how to pollinate. So we used the fresh pollen from the male to pollinate its female counterpart. I wrote a nice press release for the News and Bloom. Actually, some of you emailed me after that came out saying good work. And we just found out 15 months later the seeds are viable. Takes a long time with cycads. So some of them have germinated and they are in the greenhouse now, and we'll probably share some of them with some other botanic gardens. So I did some further investigation, and our two Diune edulae plants likely come from Veracruz. We had no records from where they may have been collected before, but based on the leaf morphology, the leaflets sit on the rachis in basically a flat 180-degree orientation. So this is very typical of plants from Veracruz. So I consulted with Andrew Voivodes, who is a Mexican cycad expert, that this is almost certainly where the plants came from, but we're not 100% sure, but still pretty cool to know. So if you think back to that 1906 photo from the cycad house, I found these two plants here. They have that similar leaf morphology. So these could be the two Diune edulae plants, 116 years ago. So pretty neat. Some other notable specimens today, the Encephalartos hortus, which is a threatened cycad from the Eastern Cape, South Africa. This was actually donated by Mr. D.S. Brown, and it's one of two cycads that are still alive today from his personal collection. And then the Diune spinulosum on the right, that was another one that he donated. So it just goes to show you that even though the people are come and go, the plants, they remain. So I found another intriguing entry. The Philippine Commission actually donated, can't see that quite, 18 Cycas circinalis plants. It might be a little hard to see, but there are question marks beside each of these entries. Cycas circinalis was an umbrella taxon that was used for basically any cycad that was found in Southeast Asia, various islands. So now, after subsequent taxonomic work, we know that these are, circinalis is truly an southern Indian endemic taxon, and everything that was circinalis is now different. So it just makes you wonder that where these would have come from in the Philippines. We have no further record, and unfortunately, none of these are alive today. That would have been really neat to look into. Oh yeah, they bought them for $57.50. That's around $1,900 US dollars today. This photo to me looks like a Cycas edentata type. That's from the 1906 photo. So it could be one of the Philippine cycas that was obtained at the fair, but we're not 100% sure, but still pretty interesting. Another large shipment that was received by the garden was from Queensland, Australia. In 1913, the previous director, Dr. Leo Moore, actually had them shipped in these Wardian cases. I didn't know what a Wardian case was before I started looking into this, but it's apparently where you put the plant in a box with soil, and they can keep it watered for the long voyage on the ship. Obviously, they don't need to do that nowadays, but that's how it was done back in the Victorian era, transport plants, or even as recently as 100 years ago. So there's a zoom in of the address on the crate. It said, to Missouri Botanical Garden. It went via London and then to New York, and I guess it was probably driven from New York here to St. Louis. So pretty interesting photos. There's the plants out of the boxes. They looked pretty good at the time. I consulted with an Australian cycad expert, actually Machen, who I did some of the field work with pre-conference. So there were some Australian species, Cycas media, Bowenia, Cerulata, Macrozemia micheli, and Morii. And they actually had some of the plants, the sex was known. So those must have been quite useful additions to the garden. Sadly, none of those are also alive today. Probably could have perished due to the pollution, but I did find the records for them. So they did come from Rockhampton, near Queensland, and then there's all the records on the left. So we fast forward to present day, and we actually have 49 cycad species representing 9 of the 10 extant genera, so pretty good representation. We're only missing Bowenia. I've been trying to work on getting a Bowenia plant, and once we get one, we'll have all 10. And that's just a nice photo I took last summer. It just looks quite nice, the cycads. Excuse me. So I wanted to just talk a little bit about some recent cycad additions that have happened since I've been here. So there's 3 species. I'll go into each of them in detail. The first one is Cycas lindstromii. This is a rather bizarre plant. Most of members of the genus Cycas are arborescent. This one is mostly acaulescent, basically a dwarf form distributed in southern Vietnam in these provinces. And it was accidentally discovered on the coast. It was only described in '97, and it's named after Anders Lindstrom, who is a famous cycad taxonomist. I personally know Lindstrom. That's me and him back at the Nongnuc Tropical Botanic Garden, 2018. So to add this taxon to the living collections is quite a treat, and it's has an IUCN Red List status of endangered. These were plants that I inherited from my former academic advisor. I took care of them in Guam, and when I was making the decision to come here, I asked if they would be interested in donating the plant. So they said yes. So just to give you an idea how tough the cycads are, That's my old apartment in Guam. They had about 90% of the roots removed. All the leaves were removed. They sat in the New Jersey USDA inspector's office for about a month before getting here, and then I stuck them in perlite, and then several months later, they just seem to magically come back to life. So they're just amazingly tough plants. And now you can see that plant in the climatron today. So I have three. I have both sexes as well, the female and male. The second species is one quite dear to me, Cycas micronesica. It's named after Micronesia for the region that it inhabits. It spans 3 island groups, so it's in Guam, Rota, Yap, and Palau. It's part of a complex of cycads called the Cycas rumphii complex. All members of this complex have a flotation layer within the seed. So you see the middle photo there. The red circle indicates the flotation layer, which likely is an adaptation to assist in ocean dispersal. This flotation layer is absent in other members of the genus, so rather interesting. And then the reproductive structures are quite striking as well. Unfortunately, this cycad went from being the most numerous tree on the island to now it is federally listed. The Cycad elacaspis scale is a cycad-specific scale insect native to Thailand and some parts of China. And it was discovered in Guam in the Upper Tumon district in 2003. In the absence of biocontrol, it can look like the plant is covered in snow, which obviously can't happen if it's in the tropics. And they feed on any soft tissue, including sporophylls, caterpillars, seeds, roots. Quite alarming. So since this has happened, you have on the left beautiful typical cycad forest pre-invasion in Guam. And then on the right, you have really sadly a lot of these trees dying. So within a few years of the invasion, the IUCN listed it as endangered, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service officially listed it as threatened in 2015. So you can still see a lot of these in the forests in Guam, but there's no recruitment. Generally, there's just the old cycad trees. There's no seedlings or juvenile plants. So it may be the only cycad worldwide whose listing is attributable to invasive insects. The others are land conversion, poaching, all the typical culprits, but this one is pretty unique. This one is also very special to me because I've had the pleasure of seeing it on all 4 of the islands where it's endemic. So in my previous position at the University of Guam, I was on a grant to collect some root samples in cycad habitats, both invaded and healthy, on Palau, Yap, obviously Guam, and then Rota, which is the island north of Guam. Sorry. So on the right, there's some of my former colleagues just on a uninvaded cycad habitat on Yap. So that was another time I'll never forget. And I had the chance, yes, to go to Palau. I just wanted to share some of these photos because that was also a lot of fun, taking a boat around to the Rock Islands, which is where these cycads are found. Hopefully the scale will not find these islands. The Palau government has pretty strict laws regulating the visits of any personnel. So we had to get a lot of permits just to be able to get on these islands. So sometimes you might also see an old Japanese World War II cannon. That's what that is on the bottom left. So that's quite exciting. And then you'll see something like this, where the plant is literally growing right by the water. It's just begging for its picture to be taken. So this picture really doesn't do it justice, but you'll see lots of plants like that, just stunningly healthy, beautiful plants. So again, with Cycas micronesica, I've had the pleasure of also seeing it in a couple ex situ collections. So there's me and Patrick Griffith, the upper left. He's the director of Montgomery Botanic Center. That is a healthy plant that was collected in Guam in response to the scale invasion. So there it's growing. On the right, that's Cycas micronesica in Thailand, and there's me and Anders Lindstrom again talking about cycads. So I wanted to share that because not only have I had the pleasure of seeing this species in all of its habitats, but it's also allowed me to make lasting friendships and collaborations, which at this point have gone on for several years. So it's a very special species to me. And it's not quite over. So since I've been working here, I've been back to Guam on a grant with Montgomery Botanic Center. We're doing some population genetics work on Cycas micronesica. So far it's restricted to Guam, but we may expand it to some of the other islands. So there's me and Griffith, and then that's on the right with some colleagues. That's me standing beside two would have to be very old Cycas micronesica specimens. So if you can sort of get an idea of how big those are, if I'm standing full height. So, and then this is the biggest plant I've ever seen. We measured it to be about 8.5 meters. This is in a very remote southern Guam habitat. Back in 2021, that's me and my former advisor, Marler. Pretty remote. It took us an hour and a half to get to this place with a guide. We estimate it to be at least 250 years old. So again, the picture doesn't do it justice. Just standing there, it was just taken to like another place. Just unreal. And so those are right here in the greenhouse. I've got two seedlings of Cycas micronesica growing here. So now we just have to wait about 200 years for it to get to be, the size we want. The third species is a rather unusual cycad. This is Zamia mirmanii. It's distributed in Belize. It is a cliff-dwelling habit where it grows in these limestone crevices, and it was only recently described in 2008. Described by Michael Colonhay. I also know Michael personally. He's a colleague, friend of mine. And it has unusual, pretty slow growing, but they grow in these crevices with no soil, and they look just fine. So just amazing plants. So I've grown some of these from seed. They're almost 2 years old, rather slow. I have them in a rocky substrate, currently growing in the pandanus. So if you ever walked through there and noticed what those baskets are, that's what they are. So something to look forward to. Maybe in a few years, you'll have these beautiful pendulous leaves with that beautiful sheen kind of just growing out of these baskets. So something to look forward to. Okay, so back to the conference. The mid conference tour, we were able to see La Salle Botanic Garden. This is a botanic garden that's currently in development in Pampanga province. So we were able to see the site dedication actually happened during the conference. They're planning to feature mostly Philippine native plants. So it'd be you can look up their website. It'll be interesting to see the how that's going to progress. Had to get a picture with their little plant nursery. That looked quite nice. They have some native cycads there in pots. So that was a lot of fun. It also rained because it's the Philippines and it rains all the time. A few more photos from the conference growers. One of the more bizarre experiences I've had during the mid-conference welcome dinner. If anyone has ever hung out with Filipinos for extended period of time, you'll find out karaoke is a big part of the culture. So I got roped into singing karaoke with some botanists. So that was another experience I'll not forget. Thankfully, there's no video recordings of this, so I don't have to put you through the pain of that. Wanted to end with just a few more of my personal cycad experiences since I prepared and planted Cycas micronesica stem cuttings. They're also called pups during my visit to Nong Nuc Tropical Botanic Garden in 2018. So that was a lot of fun. My master's thesis at the University of Guam actually involved several experiments propagating cycads. So that I was quite proud of that. I got 2 peer-reviewed publications out of that, so that was quite nice. When I was offered the position in Guam, my advisor, he wanted to construct a cycad display garden near the university or on the university grounds. So this area adjacent to the road here on the university campus was just a bunch of weeds, really. Nothing really too exciting. So we designed a walkthrough. Most of them were potted plants that were grown from seed. He had me, as a grad student, do all the labor, the planting. And then there it is today on the bottom. You can see assorted cycads. There's shortly after the planting, my aunt actually took the photo on the right. She stopped by to see how we were doing, and I was covered in sweat because I had just spent several hours digging holes, planting cycads, but that was a good time. And here it is after mulched a couple years later, so everything's looking quite nice. If you go to Guam, you can see the garden there. We have signage now as well, which tells you about what the species are, etc. And then the plant on the right is a specimen of the native Cycas micronesica. So looking rather robust with the supplemental fertilizer and irrigation. And some more examples of the garden as it was developing. So genera from all around the world, including Africa, Australia, some Cuban species. The bottom right was the nursery where I did my most of my experiments and maintained the plants. So not only was I working with cycads, they were all around, so couldn't get away from them. After the garden was completed, it was featured in the university's annual newsletter, so that was quite nice to promote it. Plant conservation. And the garden is still being used today by university students to go over like evolutionary biology, plant conservation, etc. So, living in Guam for several years, I was pretty close to the Philippines, so I did some exploratory work in Zambales province with some colleagues. So we observed Cycas zambalensis. This is a really pretty endemic Philippine species. So looking at the cones and then just being in habitat. I was brutally hot that day, but it was definitely worth it. I've also observed a Philippine species on the south flanks of Mount Pinatubo. This is actually a species which has still not been described. It doesn't conform to anything that is described from the Philippines, so it'll be nice to find out if we can get around to describing that. So that was quite a treat. The cones are quite small, so the typical of the other Philippine species are quite large. These are quite minute, so it's just very, very distinct. While I was there, I did some ethnobotany interviews for Palm Sunday. This is a big deal in the Catholic religion. So every year in April, they call them palaspas. So they're adorned on the houses of Filipinos to bring good luck and to ward off evil spirits. So Cycas revoluta is commonly used. You can see on the left, on the top picture there, it's a little more expensive because the leaves, obviously because of the thick cuticle, they don't dry out that much. They're always more expensive than the ones weaved with coconut. So that was quite interesting, and I wrote up a little article, and it was published in the Cycad newsletter back in 2017. Because every Filipino I interviewed, they thought it was a native plant, even though it's from Japan, not the Philippines. So that was just interesting. I also lectured about cycad propagation to tropical biology students at FIU when I was at Montgomery. So that was quite a treat. And this is just too cool for me not to share. This is about a new project with what's the company called again? Maine. It's a perfume company in France, which is analyzing the volatiles in Cycas micronesica, and it's making a perfume about it. So rather than have you read that, I got a little video here.
In the world, there is a lot of buzz and knowledge about animal conservation and why it's so important to protect these animals and their habitats. But what's underfunded and underspoken about is plant conservation to support the biodiversity of many important regions around the world. The Red List Project is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2018. All of the plants that the Red List Project works with are on the IUCN Red List, which is the international authority for the endangerment of plants and animals. The partnership that we are embarking on today is the Pacific cycad. These plants have been around since the dinosaurs have roamed the earth. They are Jurassic plants, or otherwise known as living fossils, that are now endangered just in the past few decades due to an invasive insect species that is attacking these plants. And why this matters to us is because in Guam, the Pacific cycad is so important to the natural habitat that with it being endangered, it's causing a true imbalance.
Before smelling it, when you see the cones here, you can imagine something dry, more woody, but when you open you cut some pieces inside, you have like a soup, like a marmalade, which brings something very, very, very fruity, almost mango or exotic fruits, which is quite interesting in our perfumery world.
The fact that I'm able to smell it today and to really enjoy this fruity part, because when you see a cone like that, I would never expect that it smells fruity. I would expect like something very woody, but this Pacific cycad has something very special. For me, it smells like tutti frutti, but also like peach jam. It has something very, very peachy, a little bit green.
We have another challenge. This is to extract part of this cica and analyze this cica to reconstitute the smell of the cica. For us perfumers, it's very important for us to have a new ingredient. We use essential oils, we use absolute, we use supercritical extract, and also enfleurage products. This is another way with this cica, because here we protect the nature.
Smelling those kind of ingredients make the perfumer dream. When I smell the Pacific cycad, which is very special, I have a lot of ideas which can be explored in several categories.
What's special about this partnership is that no plants will ever be physically harvested from the wild, but instead we will recreate the essence of this plant using our proprietary extraction method and sustainable materials on our palette to recreate that absolute quintessence and use it in customer-specific fragrances. Proceeds from the sales of those fragrances will go back to actually conserving these plants with the ultimate goal of reintroducing the Pacific cycad back into its natural habitat.
Okay, so pretty cool. This isn't out yet, but I'm sure when it's out, people will be buying it. And then when you can go to a party, you know, and they'll say, "What is that? What do you smell like?" It's like my Cycas micronesica, you know. So that'll be that's just be too. It's very cool. So to wrap up, some future directions we can for the living collections, we can increase the number of wild, provenance, and cultivated from wild plants. I'd like to increase the number of Cycas and Zamia, as these are the most species-rich genera. We can determine the provenance of some of those legacy plants, perhaps using genomics, more involvement in cycad conservation through the GCCC, the Global Cycad Conservation Consortium. It's a mouthful. And then just educating the public more on cycads. It's just a nice landscape photo I took in Thailand. Just you could see it where the climate permits, cycads can be used. It's quite a striking effect in the landscape. I just wanted to share with you this quote because it really hit me profoundly when I first read about this. This was from Oliver Sacks, Island of the Colorblind. He was a neurologist that did some work in Guam and Rota in the 90s, trying to look into some of these neurological disorders, which may have been tied to cycads, but he was just really interested in cycads. But it reads, it's not only the sheer gigantism that seemed characteristic of the group, the biggest spermatozoids, the biggest egg cells, biggest apices, cones, biggest everything in the vegetable kingdom. It was rather the sense that cycads were brilliantly adaptable and resourceful life forms full of unusual capacities and developments which had enabled them to survive for 250 million years when so many of their contemporaries had fallen by the way. So it's a great book. I recommend it. Just real quick, just shout out to Mobot for letting me go to the conference in the Philippines, the plant records team who helped me look through some of the archival material, Andrew Culligan. He's not here right now, but he saw a version of this talk when I gave it a few months ago. He's the garden archivist. And the conservatory team, thank you for your companionship, collegiality. And with that, I could take a few questions.